I am generally pretty cautious when it comes to online dating. Chat until comfortable, meet in public, and have friends knowledgeable of my whereabouts for the first meet, just in case. All that jazz. The days were usually pretty fun, or duds, but I've never had an issue and never been fearful. I have, in fact, made some really great friends. Others I just don't hear from again, no harm, no fuss, and simple. Recently, I met this guy online through POF. I talked quite a bit through the app, and then, often for hours on the phone. He seemed like a great dude, so we decided to meet. He lives about 45 minutes away, a town I do not visit often at all, so I'm very unfamiliar with it. There was a talk about me staying there, and we decided to grab some drinks. I thought maybe I'd just get a room for myself as to not stay at his place off the bat. I don't know why, but a lot of unusual judgment just kind of flew out the window at some point because we left my car near a park. I had no idea how to get back to it from his place, if I needed to, because he took so many twists and turns on the drive where I was. Oh yeah, he suggested I crawl on the back of his van because it's a small town. He doesn't want anyone to see me. Why didn't I just turn around and walk back to my car right then? He also took my phone to lock in a box to hide its location. I know, I should have seen the red flag. Like I said, I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I thought I based all our conversations that this may be part of a silly, what he thought was to be some sort of game. He even kind of presented it as such when I talked to him before I left town. We finally arrived at his home and hung out, watched movies, and talked. It was pretty normal. We had some dinner, and at some point, he begins kind of acting off, asking a lot of questions in a kind of intimidating tone, making me feel a little dumb. Dissecting everything I'd say, constantly pacing, chain smoking. He was intense overall. I began to feel a little uncomfortable, even suggesting he would drive me back to my car and we would call it a night so I could go home. He refused. He thought I was joking, said if I wanted to leave I could call a cab. I could not afford to allow the meter to run while I tried to figure out where to tell the driver to fund my car. At this point, I do have my phone back and had messaged a friend to keep an on-hand case of a 911 come get me situation. I'd know how to get my car from a certain point if she could get me. Things settled though. We felt a bit more comfortable. Okay, well, I was just gonna sleep now. Get the night over with and get back to my car in the morning. And that's what eventually happens, and I make it home safe. Even after that, we keep talking at least. Phone calls, texts, and we both agree it was intention awkward. He apologized, so we tried to hang out again. It was actually loads better. I felt comfortable and lots of laughs. It was good actually. I willingly stayed the night this time rather than feeling trapped. He offered to grab my pillow from my bag for me. When he went to the other room, when he did, my makeup bag had fallen out. This was actually relevant. And he returned it to the place and let me know. Okay, I fell asleep talking. He drove me to my car the next morning. We didn't talk much the rest of the day. I was pretty busy being a bridesmaid and doing things of that lines. Well, he texted me in the evening, and I tell him I'd call him later if he'd like as I was busy. I didn't get a response, so I texted him when I was free to see if he was awake and still wanted to do that. This was around 2 a.m., not an abnormal time for us at all. This is where he first goes off on me, asking me what kind of script I had prepared for him and what I actually want from him. Okay, what script? I tell him that, as we already discussed and agree upon, I like to start as friends while we get to know each other. He then tells me I'm stupid out of towner for toting around a makeup bag as of the side and some kind of smokescreen. He said it was sloppy of me, and the fact that I'd call later was some kind of red flag, though he knew I had things to do. All I kept thinking was, what? It was easy for me just to leave it all behind. A week later though, I get a voicemail demanding a call right away. I was at work and my building has bad reception, and I saw no missed call notification. Just a new voicemail, so I had no idea who left it. I went back to listen to it again after an hour or so. I could check the number that left it and the message was gone. I know I saved it. Even checked erase messages and it wasn't there. Well, I assume it was him because same thing happened with a message he left the following night. Excessive heinous things. Just awful things. He said things along the lines of, "Listen, you stupid fucking cunt. You want to come in here with your fucking makeup bag full of fucking gels and stupid shit? Trying to collect evidence at my place so that you can fucking put people in cages and torture them like a dumb fucking cunt? You want to tell me about your good fucking person? Fuck the fuck up, you stupid fucking whore. Run and hide." Like I said, he deserved to be hiding. Enjoy the prison that you put yourself in by being a dumb cunt. And fucking enjoy it. Hi. And don't fucking lie that you're gonna be sleeping in the fucking bed next time, or you're gonna be doing some fucking detective work. I ought to fucking slap you in the mouth. So far, that's the last I've heard. As of Sunday morning. Thankfully, he knows a little personal info of mine. He doesn't know where I live. This kind of thing has never happened to me before, and I'm not sure how to respond. I'm just hoping it doesn't escalate any further. This memory of mine begins about 3 years ago, when I graduated high school. I had grown up with my grandparents, but decided to move to a different and much larger city to live with my dad for the first time in 12 years. I somewhat knew the city already because I spent my summers with him. But this would be the first time I would have the freedom of an adult to come and go as I pleased, drive my car anywhere, smoke cigarettes whenever I wanted. I was excited, though sad to leave all my friends. As soon as I was settled in, my dad and stepmom sat me down to discuss the few rules and what I need to know about the complex. Basic things like, go wherever you want, but let us know when you leave and when you're coming back, even if it's 2 a.m. Oh, and you'll have to park on the street because the apartment complex has limited parking. One more thing. There's the neighborhood creep. This guy George was well known to all the women in the complex as well as of police that patrolled the area. He was tall and fairly huge, very intimidating looking. My parents were pretty certain that he was leaving alone for one reason, my dad. Though George had a habit of stalking other women in the complex, he would stop and find a new target if they had a man make a show of being at their place. A brother, a lover, or a father. It didn't matter what he was to the woman, or what he looked like. George would back off immediately. Since I lived with my dad, who is quite tall and rather big, I felt also confident that I would be alright. And I was, for a time. It started about 6 months after I moved in. My stepmom and dad were fighting a lot more until she got up and left him. One night, I was sitting on my porch having a cigarette and browsing Facebook or whatever. I wish I could say that I felt like I was being watched, but I probably just looked up because I felt a bug or something. George was standing about 15 feet away, a little bit behind a tree, staring intently at me. I nearly dropped my cigarette. Shakily, I stubbed it out and went inside. I was home alone, so I made sure to lock all my doors and then played a video game in my room. I told myself that I was probably just paranoid. The next morning, I got up for my morning cigarette and coffee. Lo and behold, moments after I stepped onto the porch, George came out ambling of his apartment to look my way. I sucked out my cigarette and went back inside. This pattern continued for a couple of weeks. It was like George stood on his sliding glass door peeking out, waiting to see when I popped out. I told my dad about it and he tried to sit with me whenever I would to smoke. If he came with me, George wouldn't even peep a head out of his door. Of course, the other women in the complex have already tried to call the police about George. He lives in the complex and staring isn't a crime, so there wasn't much anybody can do. I didn't know how far George had taken it with other women before. With that info in mind, I knew calling wouldn't be much use. Things slowly escalated. Once my stepmom left, I had access to her parking spot, so I had 3 ways to get from my car to my apartment depending on how I parked. One of the ways went just past George's apartment, about 5 feet from his door. Since I got off work late most nights, I avoided that route as much as possible. Slowly but surely, like he memorized my schedule. He will be on one of the paths when I was coming home. Not directly on the concrete, but a few feet away on the grass. Behind a tree. It was like he thought I couldn't see him. Picture a child hiding very terribly behind a tree. You can 100% see 90% of their body, and you know that they are there. That's how he would do it. I would just rush past him, avoid eye contact, but prepare to scream if I heard him come after me. I started to carry my keys between my fingertips. I bought a pocket knife and I will walk from my car with it halfway open already, even though I have never been in any kind of fight in my life. Around this time, I believe my mom was trying to find me free self-defense classes, since I couldn't afford anything on my tight budget. My dad was steadily getting more and more pissed off as George edged closer and closer to escalating as the days went by. It went from November to May. If my dad was at home, I would lock my bedroom door and keep my knife under my pillow. I would Skype all night with my boyfriend, just so someone could call 911 for me if need be. I put a bunch of flower pots in the front of my bedroom door, just so I could hear any noise if he tried to come in. Nightmares of being kidnapped or raped for murder started to invade my sleep every night. Then one day my neighbor, Shell, was gossiping to me. Did you hear about George? No. He got arrested last night. In the complex parking lot, there's a sort of electrical power box. It stands about waist high and is perhaps 2 or 3 feet wide. About 10 minutes before I was supposed to come home and park right in front of it, some lady with her kid walked by and saw George sitting on the box masturbating. Was he waiting there for me? Jerking off to the thought of me seeing him. The thought of it makes me want to puke and scares me all the time. I was relieved for a few days of my stress, but it was only a few days that he was gone. And then he was back. He went right back to the same old routine. One night, he got far braver. It was maybe 7 p.m. when I went out for a cigarette with my dad. A neighbor walked up to chat with my dad, and George came outside and stood in the opening, staring me down. Dude's asking to get his fucking ass kicked, my dad said under his breath. Then he chatted to my neighbor some more. I rolled my eyes, went inside, and played some more video games. I was healing in a World of Warcraft dungeon when I heard Shell shouting, "Where are you?" But I was healing, a pretty important job, and I figured she was talking to someone else. Until she burst into my room in a panic, her eyes huge. She hopped from foot to foot, frantically like she was doing some potty dance. "He's bleeding." "Who?" I asked in bewilderment. "Your dad, come quick." I made some teenager huffing sound and I left my computer, certainly pissing off the rest of the group. I grabbed our little first aid kit filled with band-aids. I thought in my mind that my dad was probably doing something stupid and tossing off his pocket knife and trying to catch it. But when I stepped outside, I found myself face to face with a real horror. About 6 people surrounded my dad, including Shell. And my neighbor Caleb held a shirt to my dad's side. He was facing away from me and his entire back, which is covered in blood. It looked like she had been mauled by a bear. That was seriously my first thought. I didn't know he had bears in the city. Caleb's hold on the shirt slipped, and the blood sprayed. Felt queasy writing this down. I have never in my life been the person to turn into an emergency. Blood makes me lightheaded, and I have anxiety attacks over not being able to find a specific bookmark. But all of the adults, people around 30 or 40, while I was just 18 around me, were panicked aside from Caleb. I needed to be the person that people turned to. I threw the first aid kit onto the porch and told Shell where do we keep our towels. She rushed to go grab one. "Has anyone called 911?" I shouted. 5 pairs of eyes turned to look at me like they'd never heard of 911 before. "No," my dad said. "I can't afford an ambulance." "Shut up," I said. "What happened?" "The fucker stabbed me." So I dialed 911 and relayed our address and reason for emergency. Operator told us to keep applying pressure to the wound on my father's lower back. My dad is a true champ. Even though the sidewalk was just one big puddle of blood, he stayed on his feet until someone thought to run and get him a chair. I ran back and forth along the walkways to get the police and show them the house that George lived in. And then I ran back and forth to get the paramedics. They were so cold and agonizingly slow. They walked calmly and I wanted to scream to them to run. My dad could be bleeding out and you don't care. I learned that later that they don't rhyme because if they let a gentleman kick in, mistakes can happen. They shoved Caleb out of the way because he refused to let go of my dad's wound and got him back into the ambulance. I was about to jump on when the police stopped me and told me that I had to stay so I could get my statement. My dad shouted at me to call his boss. I remember all his allergies and whatnot for the paramedics. God, 2 years later and all these details have been burned into my brain. I gave my statement to the police. They made me sit outside my complex on a sidewalk for 2 to 3 hours. They kept me up to date on my dad. Once I called his boss, my boss, and answered my stepmom's message, that's when I allowed myself to break down. I felt like I cried forever. One of the cops was nice enough to go into my house and grab my cigarettes and a bottle of water for me. He stayed with me the entire time to make sure it didn't run off or something. But he was very nice. He offered to let me sit in his cruiser a few times to get away from the cold. George was waiting in his apartment when they came. They took him out to where I was, and there were 14 cars. 14. He still kept trying to stare at me. I stared right back with such hatred that I've never felt in my life. I wanted to go over there and just murder him. My babysitting cop looked over and saw that George was staring, so he used his flashlight to keep George from being able to look at me. Once it was all over, I was allowed to go back to my house, where I waited for information about my dad. I gathered the story from my neighbors while he was in the hospital for 9 days. He shouted at George to leave my daughter alone, and George had shouted back at him while I was in the house, totally unaware. George said something along the lines of, "Come tell that to my face like a man." So my dad hopped over the porch and walked up to him. The cop had been waiting with a 12-inch blade held to the side of his leg. He struck out with his empty hand and then caught my dad in the back with his knife. They missed his kidney very, very narrowly and traveled up and punctured his lung and damaged his diaphragm. My dad didn't realize he'd been stabbed at first. He got George into a headlock and pummeled the shit out of him. Thinking the dude had just punched him in the kidney, George dropped the knife, rolled in the grass, and picked up another knife he had been hiding and stabbed my dad again, this time in the upper back. This wound, much more shallow, but still requires stitches. At this point, Sho came outside and screamed to my dad that he was bleeding. He took off his shirt and got pissed and threw it at George. At that point, the neighborhood stalker put his hand up and went to his apartment. The blood stayed on the pavement until the noon the next day, when my neighbors kindly washed it off for me. I still have pictures in my email of it, as well as my dad's injuries. My dad spent more time in the hospital in critical condition than George spent held in jail. I feel like it was my fault. I've been addressing that in therapy, but I still feel awful about it and feel like my dad had to fight my own battle for me. Throughout the week, while I was on my porch or just outside, I had so many women come out to me. They all told me to thank my dad for them. They had all been terrorized by George at some point, and now they were certain he would be away for good. Several poor women had George stalk them up to their apartment door and pull his pants down, demanding sex. I can't believe cops couldn't do anything. One of those days, one of my neighbors came up to tell me that the police and neighbors had searched the complex and found that George had stashed many knives all over the place, buried in gardens, stuck behind trees, under his doormats. I shudder to think what he might have planned to do one day if he grabbed one of his targets and do something far more sinister than stare. George was declared guilty for battery and deadly weapon, but the attempted murder charge was dropped. He was out of prison by Christmas on good behavior or whatever, but my dad and I have lifelong restraining orders against him. He has never tried to come after me, so I could only hope that he's terrified of my dad. I wish I could tell you guys that I took self-defense classes and learned to fight the way my dad can. But I'm still a pussy who can't even slap a spider, so there's that. But Dad is doing all right now. He just had his third surgery on Tuesday trying to repair the damage done to him internally. We're hoping that this will be his last, and his quality of life will vastly improve. I probably owe my life to my dad. If he hadn't thought George for me, maybe I would have been the first victim George stabbed. Back in 2008, I was on a hunting trip with my brother. up near the Canadian-Michigan border. We had rented a cabin for a week, and we were looking forward to a nice quiet week until this monster spoiled it all. One night, after a day of being in the woods, we were tired and didn't feel like cooking up a meal, so I decided to jump in my truck and drive into town to get some pop and some grub, while my brother stayed back to wash up. So, I drove into the town by myself, and was away about 45 minutes, probably not even a solid hour. I talked with the gal at the counter for a few, but I wanted to get back to feed my brother since he gets grouchy when he doesn't have food, and I didn't want him to be acting on me. By the time I headed back, it was getting dark, and by the time I reached the cabin, the sun had already gone down all the way. I hit the road leading to the cabin and could see the silhouette of something big, looking in one of the windows of the cabin. At first, I thought it was Everett, since it looked like it was standing on two legs. But this thing looked to be too tall. So, then I thought to myself, well, then it's a bear. I didn't want no bear coming around the cabin and causing trouble, so I decided to scare him off with my headlights. So I aimed my truck in his direction and flipped on my high beams. What I saw then wasn't a bear, it was a monster. When my lights hit it, it spun around and I saw the whole thing, and it was only standing on two legs. Now, you wanted my description of this thing, and I wish I had my camera handy so I could have just took a picture and gave it to you, but I wasn't expecting to see any type of monster out there. He was a big guy, like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, but it wasn't any Sasquatch I was looking at. It looked more like a werewolf. He was more than 7 feet tall, based on how high his head was above the top of the window. He was brown, like a chocolate lab, but the coat was different. It was shaggy like a wolf and had lighter spots in the chest and legs. He had big muscles like he went to the gym. His chest was really wide and his shoulders looked like Brock Lesnar, a real musclehead. He had arms that looked like they could kill you easily, and these long, finger hands with big nails at the ends, and his neck was as thick as my waist almost. Even with all the power in his body, that ape was scared the hell out of me. It was his face. He looked like he was madder than hell about something. Maybe because I interrupted him. Maybe that was just his attitude all day. Who knows? But those eyes, they will haunt me all my days. I believe in good and evil, and this thing was pure evil. The light reflected off his eyes like a night predator, and the rest of his face looked like a wolf, snout, teeth, nose, ears, and all just like a wolf. When this thing spun around to face me, it pivoted on his two back legs and turned just like a human would. First, he turned his waist to look at me, then pivoted face me entirely. My body went numb and I started to shake. What in the hell was this thing? A werewolf? No. The only thing I could think was that it was trying to get to my brother, and he didn't have any idea what this thing was. So, I started honking my horn and flashing my lights to get it to try to go away. Then that thing put its hands over its eyes to cover it like a person would. It gnashed its teeth at me and then ran off into the woods, and it was still on two legs. I pulled right the hell up to the cabin as close as I could, grabbed my mag light and ran into the door. Left the truck running and I was calling to my brother like a crazed man. Everett ran to the living room yelling at me, asking what the hell I was doing. I told him something was out there and we had to leave now. Luckily, my brother's a trusting man. 43 years of living with me, he should know when I'm serious, right? So we grabbed our rifles and mag lights and took off into the truck with haste. As we ran to the truck, we could both hear something big running in the woods next to the cabin, and the loudest growl I've ever heard. That growl almost shook my insides. We tossed the guns to the truck and jumped in. Everett was shining his light to the forest, but he didn't see anything. Then we took off. We got the hell out of there. On the way back into town, I told my brother what I had seen and he just shook his head. I think he was letting it soak in. He looked at me and said, "Ard, I think you saw yourself a werewolf." I looked up at the sky and it wasn't a full moon. I don't know what I saw that night. We went back during the day a few days later. After going to church, I might add, and praying a lot. We got our stuff and then talked to the gentleman that rented us the cabin and told him what I had seen. He swore that he had never heard of anything like that around that before, but I got the impression he was lying to us. That's why I never go into the woods alone or unarmed anymore. On hot summer nights, predatory catfish are very active. So are creepy stalkers. A few years ago, while fishing with some friends at a well-frequented but poorly lit catfishing hotspot, our night out was totally ruined by some weirdo. I was a little bit tipsy, gathering firewood. My buddy was smoking cigarettes, watching the tips of our poles for a bite. The girls had just squatted to piss nearby, and we were enjoying our little campfire. By no coincidence, a strange man calmly and almost silently walked up to our group. He came from the pitch black, as if he'd been lurking or watching us from afar. His mannerisms were very deliberate, as if he were somehow in control of the situation. My buddy gave him the cold shoulder, but I tried to make nervous small talk with the stranger. I assumed he was also a fisherman, looking for info on what was biting. Now, he seems totally indifferent to any talk about fishing, and he certainly didn't sense the emotional mood of the group towards him. The girls were definitely creeped out and nervous. At an awkward lull in the conversation, the stranger pulled out a large hunting knife and rubbed his thumb across the blade in a self-soothing way. I assumed maybe he was a lonely Nam veteran, nothing more. Abruptly, my buddy started packing up all of our gear and turned ice cold. I remember the stranger getting a head start, weaving on foot somewhere ahead of us. I'll never forget the car ride home. My buddy and his wife explained that they had actually encountered that creep at a fishing spot before, shrugging him off with some disinterested small talk. And upon leaving for a short errand, they realized the creep followed them to the store and appeared in the aisle they were headed for. My body was visibly shooken up by this latest encounter. It put a damper on a favorite hangout of ours, and I'm pretty sure he followed us all home that night. I read people quite well, and there was a definitive subtext to the uncanny conversation I had with this guy. Looking back, it seemed like he had something well up inside of him that he was alluding to. Perhaps a bit of self-restraint towards us, but certainly not mercy or empathy. I followed his train of thought, and it seemed like he had an air of accomplishment and physical dominance over the group. There was some other highly specific circumstantial aspects of the encounter that led me to believe this guy was a murderer. I don't want to get into specifics, but this guy was hands down the most creepiest motherfucker I've ever met. There are several cold cases of dead or missing women within a 200-mile radius of this guy. He had all the cold mannerisms of a complete psychopath. After almost 10 years, I can't shake the feeling that if we met again, that would be really murdered. I was on the app Whisper, where you can post anonymous confessions or whatever you want. I posted something about my school and how annoying this one assignment was that I had to do. After an hour or so, I get a message from someone around 9 miles away, asking if I wanted to make $100. I'm ready for this to be someone asking me for some kind of sexual favor or something. But this person just wants old bed sheets. I say no, I'm not interested. But they keep persisting on getting sheets, clothes, and etc. I finally agree to maybe giving them a shirt or something, but the whole thing is just funny to me. I can tell my friends and my dad didn't really want to deal with it. They thought it was sketchy. My friend agrees to bring bed sheets to the person with me, who is offering $100, just for some clothes and bed sheets. It's too good to be sounding true, so we're moving in numbers. I asked their intended purpose of wanting the items, and they say they want to cuddle with them. I'm a little weirded out, but really want the cash. I tell them to meet me at a Walgreens because I go there on the way to school every morning. They agree. I told them I leave it in a tree somewhere as I couldn't wait there as I had to get to school. They end up asking for a picture of me, but I'm not that idiotic. I describe myself using a description that doesn't fit me at all, just in case they want to pull something. Then they ask about my friends and if they know about this, and if they should bring some of their stuff as well. That was even weirder. I tell my friends who want to give the bed sheets that I'm not sure if we should go through with this, and she thinks it's too good to be true as well. I end up telling that person that I feel like this is sketchy and I don't know if I should do this. They seem really frantic and desperate. They offer me $215 for the stuff. And I tell my friend that we could really use the money, and she agrees but tells me I should ask for proof that they have the money. I ask them for proof, but the money is on their card apparently, and they need to use an ATM. Kind of a red flag, but the items we're selling can be replaced, so it's not a big deal. The next morning, I woke up very late for my bus and informed my friend that she should probably just leave the sheets at home or something because I wouldn't have time to drop them up before school. I tell the person that, and once again they're desperate. Why can't you drop them off? Today's the only day I can ever pick them up. I'll give you even more money. Just please get them to me. I have no idea, and I have no way to get to the Walgreens after school, because then I'd be risking missing my bus home and my parents can't pick me up and I have no money for a public bus. I inform them of that and tell them I'd be happy to wait a while until they can once again come and get them, but they insist on getting them from another store after school. I can get to if that's a thing. And they seriously give me so much money that there's no other way. I give up. I'm not risking my friend or my life for some desperate 20-plus-year-old loser who wants to cuddle my clothes and friends of bed sheets. I don't know their true intentions. If they really had $300 to give me or not, but oh well. Something my gut told me not to go and just drop them off somewhere. Something made me late that morning. When I was 18, so in about 2006, my friend and I decided to take a cruise to celebrate becoming adults. The type of cruise we choose to take had a lot of alcohol, food, and a lot of Jew guys. One night, I couldn't sleep. My friend passed out cold and I, for the life of me, just couldn't drift off to sleep. I decided to go out to the deck and have a cigarette, and take a walk to hopefully tire myself out. I found my headphones, cigarettes, and lighter, and left the room quickly. The halls were deserted, which didn't surprise me as it was 3 a.m. So I put my headphones in and blasted my favorite band at the time, Marianas Trench, and walked out of the hall to the upper deck. I felt an eerie feeling and looked back feeling like someone was watching me. The hair on my neck stood up. I turned around quickly, but no one was behind me. I kinda laughed at myself and said, "Okay, Mandy, get it together." I walked up to the deck that was also deserted, and so I found a spot on a bench closer in front of the ship and sat down. I lit a cigarette and stared out at the ocean. As I smoked my cancer stick, for a few minutes focusing on the reflection of the moon on the water, I suddenly felt someone sit beside me. I look over instinctively, and a guy about 40 or so was sitting beside me. I didn't want to talk to a stranger, so I looked back at the water. The guy beside me suddenly yanked out my earbud. I looked at him annoyed and said, "What the hell?" "You are pretty," he told me. Thank you," I replied awkwardly. "Are you here alone?" he asked. He moved closer as he did this. "No," I told him, feeling anxious. "With your boyfriend?" he asked. I looked at him and my gut told me to lie, and I said, "Yeah, he's sleeping." He gave me a creepy side grin. "Pretty girl like you. If you were my girlfriend, I'd be making these waves rock," he joked with a laugh. I looked at him horrified. "My name's Bahame," he told me, inching closer again. I didn't respond. Instead, I put my earbuds back and hoping that he would get the hint. Then I continued to smoke my cigarettes. A few seconds later, he yanked down my earbud again, and his bull scared and pissed me off. A few seconds later, he yanked my earbud out again, and this bull scared and pissed me off. I stood up quickly. "Do you like wine?" he asked. "I have wine in my room. You should join me for a glass." At this point, I was freaked out completely. "No, I don't drink wine and I don't know you. Please leave me alone," I told him sternly. "So angry," he said with a chuckle. "He needs someone to clear that up for you." I started to walk away and head back to my room, and I got about 3 steps away when he grabbed my left wrist and stopped me. Before I could say anything, he grabbed me and held me in a huge hug, and I shit you not, I felt the bulge in his pants against my leg. "You smell so good," he said. I pulled away violently while screaming, "Get the fuck away from me." I was able to get far enough away from him that I could run quickly inside. A security guard must have heard me scream because as I reached the door to get back inside, he let me in and stopped. I was crying from fear and he asked me if I was okay. I managed to choke out what had happened and he told me to stay inside as he rushed outside to do it to John. A few minutes later, he came back inside and told me there was no man on the deck and that he may have gone back to his room. He had me fill out a report and give a detailed description of my attacker, and then he escorted me back to the room. The next morning, I told my friend about what happened and she made me agree not to go out on deck alone anymore. She didn't have to tell me twice. The rest of the cruise, I was on edge, but I didn't see John again. The weird thing is that there was no Muhammad listed on the ship, and no man watching his description was ever found, according to the security guard who took my report. A few coworkers tried to find this man, as they didn't want him harassing any other woman. This scares me because I know how it happened, and I know he smelled and how greasy he seemed. I am a 30-year-old male who lives in upstate New York. My wife and I recently installed the Ring doorbell security camera on the front of our house and on our garage. Last night, I was up editing videos for my YouTube channel, and I kept hearing the sounds of footsteps in our side yard. Our side yard is full of twigs, sticks, and leaves. We have 2 giant trees there, so you can hear when someone is walking on that side of the house. My Ring kept telling me that there was motion detected, but every time I looked at the live feed, there wasn't anyone there. About 3 minutes go by, and the sound stopped. I wrote it off as a dog or some kind of animal walking through, and that's why nothing showed up by the time I looked at the live feed. After an hour, I started to hear the footsteps again. But this time, I also heard knocking on the side of the house. At this point, I'm sorry to get a bit scared. After a couple of minutes, the knocking stopped. I then passed it off as some drunk college kid messing around. We live next to a house that has college students residing there, and our side yards are attached. What confirmed my fear was when we lost power. We have had thunderstorms lately, and it was starting to get windy and thunder was cracking in the distance along with the lightning. Out of nowhere, the power goes out and I'm sitting in the dark. The only light is the backlight in my laptop. The phones aren't working, but the street lights are still on. Then, after a couple of minutes, I heard the loudest thump against the side of my house. It made me almost jump out of my skin. At this point, my Ring security is going crazy. It's like I have motion at my garage and at the front door. Then, on the side of the house and at the back of the front door. Every time I got the notification on my phone, a huge thud came against the part of the house. What made my skin crawl was finally seeing who was making all the noise. I have a screenshot of what it looks like, the night vision of the Ring Doorbell 2 system. The man on the porch said, "Open the door, It will all be over very soon, I promise. In a very calm and soft voice. I had chills, and I froze in place, and I couldn't say anything back. He stared into the camera for a good 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. I have sent this photo to the police, and they have made note of it, and I haven't heard anything yet. This happened back while his clown sightings were going around. Honestly, I thought it was all just a bunch of shit until I saw one. The town I stay in is very small, so I wasn't expecting this craze to be picked up. I assumed it was going to stay in the big cities around me and eventually fizzle out. Sadly, I was mistaken. The first time I saw Bozo, that's what I'll be referring to him as, was one morning when I was walking to work. I was about halfway there when I came up to the crosswalk and waited for the light to turn so I could go. On the other side of the street, however, I could see Bozo standing behind some bushes. He was in the parking lot of an abandoned factory. I tried to brush off the creepy vibes I was getting from him and just cross the street as I normally would. Once I was close enough, I called out, "Nice costume, dumbass," and kept walking. I told a few coworkers about it, and they all agreed he is probably some dude with too much time on his hands. That night while walking home, however, I saw him again. He was in the same spot he was that morning. If I didn't know any better, I would have said he never moved all day. It was eerie as hell, the way he just stood there. He was so stoic. The only thing that moved was his head that turned to watch me as I passed by, and the balloons he was holding that blew around in the wind. I made it home fine and went to bed soon after. That morning I woke up to get ready for work, mentally preparing myself to go in contact with Bozo again. What I didn't prepare for was the red balloon that was floating in my kitchen when I went to make coffee. I live alone, for the record, and all my doors were locked. Bozo was the immediate suspect. But why was he targeting me? All I did was call him an asshole in passing. Does that really warrant a home invasion for some stupid prank? I popped the stupid thing. I said fuck the coffee and went on about my day. Surprisingly enough, Bozo wasn't standing behind the bushes today. He was gone. I continued trying to convince myself that this was some elaborate prank brought on by one of my asshole coworkers, but we didn't know each other that well. We went off for drinks a time or two, but they'd never been to my house. A couple days passed, and stranger things started to take place. I found a clown nose in my toilet one day, a balloon tied to my bedpost, and finally, there was confetti sprinkled all throughout my house. That last one had to have happened while I was at work, because I came home to it. The other two had happened overnight. This was getting out of hand. Someone was clearly fucking with me. And even if it was a stupid prank, the guy had broken in at least 3 times at this point. I went up to the police station and convinced an officer to come back with me and check the place out. He said that from what he could tell, whoever was doing it was extremely smart. The locks had been picked instead of fried open, and he must have worn gloves, as there were no prints of the knob other than my own. I told him about Bozo, and as expected, he looked at me like I was nuts. He saw how freaked I was, and agreed that if someone had clearly broken in, he would watch my house for the night. He parked across the street in a neighboring driveway and scoped it out until about 3 a.m. I was woken up by the sirens whooping once, and the lights flashing over the windows. Looking on my window, I saw the officer had someone in custody. He held into the ground and cuffed them. I knew then that it was safe to go outside. The officer put the gun in his car, then came to talk to me. He saw that Bozo stood outside for about 10 minutes before finally heading up to the front door. As soon as he started to pick the lock, the officer stepped in. He said that Bozo didn't fight or protest, and responded well to his orders. The question of why still lingered in my head, however. According to the officer, Bozo wouldn't talk, He refused to even butter his name. Lozo was taken in, dressed as a clown, mind you, and was fingerprinted, charged, and bucked. Turns out he really was just some random guy who thought it would be funny to mess around with someone. He had record dating back 10 years with basically nothing but robbery and breaking and entering charges. That would explain how he got into my house so easily. I've since upgraded my security and have had no more issues with clowns, or burglary for that matter. And I just hope it stays that way.